Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Bayash, and I'm the Communications Coordinator here at TechSoup Canada. So thank you all for joining in today's webinar on digital storytelling. First, we would like to acknowledge the sacred land on which TechSoup Canada office operates. It has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years, and this land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. So, before we get started, I'd just like to quickly introduce you to TechSoup Canada and tell you that our mission is to help nonprofits use technology effectively. So, we provide access to discounted and donated software, as well as learning resources like these. So, if you have ideas for a webinar you'd like to see, blog posts, any learning resources at all, please get in touch and we'd be happy to see what we can do. And today, this is how you can get in touch on these various platforms, some of which we'll be talking about today. And just to get into logistics, I would like you to know that today you can use the GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side to change the audio settings, enter your questions, or chat with us. At the end of the webinar presentation, we'll have a quick Q&A session. So just a reminder that you're all on mute. So if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to chat to us in the question box. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so we will upload the video on our website shortly and have additional resources for you as well. And just a bit about myself, I'm Yasmina, I'll be presenting today. I do the communications here at TechSoup. I craft resources, materials like these to help you use tech more effectively. I'm also the resident chef here. So we have a monthly newsletter we send out by the cup with soup recipes that I personally curate myself to give you nothing but the best. And now let's dive right in. So today we'll be talking about digital storytelling to understand what is digital storytelling, what are the tools to create them, and how are they used out there. And the first question is, why invest? So it's because we want you to learn all of these things today. This is the purpose. The first is to build an understanding of how it can elevate your communications and marketing. The second is to review best practices and case studies of successful nonprofits out there, because there's always great stuff you can look at, replicate it, see how it works even better for your organization. Also to explore how various tech tools out there, often for free, can help you create these visuals, these videos, just like a pro, super easily. And finally, to get you to see how a good story, a quality story, is fundamentally an ethical one, that ethics is not an add-on, but is part of everything that we do. A big feat, but we're happy to share it with you today. So let's start with, what is digital storytelling exactly? What do we mean by it? We mean that it's highly visual material. So it'll be videos, images, infographics that will highlight your organization's work, the impact, and you'll see it's about engagement. So it's not about just throwing a story out there. You want to create a conversation around it. And you get the audience, you encourage them to do two things: spread the word about the work you do, why it's important, build your branding, and second of all, to take action. That could be volunteering with your organization, donating, becoming members. And this is a really simple example of how it works. So this was a slideshow created by the Red Cross in the wake of the Nepal earthquake. And you get to see various pictures showing you the work on the ground, people doing the work, whether it's volunteers with the locals, getting direct quotes. And next to it on the right, you see that direct action we're talking about. We see the donate button, join in. There's even donating, giving blood, sharing a story. So this is a really great, simple example. And we know that digital stories using out there is being used by nonprofits. Why? Because it works. We have the data to back you up. So I know we have some board members joining us today. You're welcome. And for those who want to go to the board to make a case about investing in it, this is the data we have for you today. We are wired to process images quickly. So basically, we have the first thing, the picture superiority effect, that says that visuals can convey up to 6 times more information than words alone. And we also have the dual coding theory that says people recall images better because they create both a verbal reaction and an image reaction in the brain. So again, why mention the science? Because the data tells us that visual storytelling simply works. And that's why it should be an essential part of your organization's communication strategy. And this is a really good quote by actually Julia Campbell, who's a consultant who does digital storytelling. And it says, medical and law journals love dry statistics, research, but human beings and mainstream media outlets love stories. And we'll show you why. We get to see data here. In this case, it was from The Guardian. They created a graphic sourced from UNICEF, UN agency, showing that 2017 was the worst year for children being killed in the war in Syria. We have 910 children killed. These are really difficult numbers to wrap your head around. So you get the dry data here, and we'll show you the difference when you use a story. In this case, we've used the story of Omar, the boy who stopped growing, and this was collected by the UNHCR and created. And I'm showing you the stills so that we can quickly go through it. The first question the narrator asks Omar is, what do you remember about Syria? And he immediately starts talking about remembering how his uncle Ahmed was killed in very vivid ways. As Omar talks, you realize, wow, this kid's really mature, but he looks so young. As the camera pans in and we get to really see him, we realize something is different. And that's when the dad tells us, actually, even though Omar is nearly 8 years old, he's trapped in the body of a 5-year-old due to a hormone deficiency. So previously in Syria, prior to the war, he was able to get access to the medications and the hormones that he no longer can, and has now essentially stopped growing. It's a really powerful story. We see how Omar, for example, is eating a lot of sweets and milk. He's so cute, but as well, he's also so mature, and something just doesn't add up. And the mother then gets to also share more stories about his height. She says to see a young boy unable to grow despite his age is very upsetting. And so the idea is that here's Ahmed going to school, and here's Ahmed as well in school, but he's so much tinier than the other students. The idea is that this is a very unique story about a child. But instead of just hearing about the statistics about children dying in Syria, now we see that direct impact, how a child like Omar is affected. And these stories work because Omar has a success story. Due to this campaign and being profiled by the UNHCR, eventually the family were granted asylum in Finland, where Omar is now growing again and getting access to the medication and the hormones that he needs. So these are the stories being used. Before we dive into the case studies, we want to show you what are the best practices in the sector in 2 ways. First, what are the best practices in the digital channels being used? According to a white paper by Network for Good and Vanessa Chase, these are the different channels being used, but the 3 that are critical to fundraising are, and mostly used, social media at 72%, that's why we're covering it today, newsletters at 68%, and then websites at 67%. So ultimately what we're hoping to show you in this webinar is that visuals aren't standalones. What they do is augment your social media and marketing. And I am trying to go fast because we're trying to cover as much as we can. But the second thing is best practices in donor relations. So digital storytelling shouldn't just be an add-on here and there. It should be a part of your comprehensive donor relations strategy. Whether high or low budget, storytelling would be ideally integrated into each single one of these steps. And it makes sense, right? Because it can assist you in making greater connections. Storytelling assists you in being able to communicate more and learn more about your supporters, and that's how you build cultivation. And so having shown you what is digital storytelling, what are the best practices, what types of stories are out there? There's quite a few, but these are the 4 that we think are brilliant and that you should focus on. And the first place, the top winner, is the impact story. Your donors and supporters give money and time to your organization, and this means you have a responsibility to use money wisely and responsibility to communicate the results that you achieve. So with the use of visuals like images, infographics, videos, you can communicate impact in a more intimate way. Food banks are actually especially good at this. And the food bank we thought we'd show you today is the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. And when you go to the main page on impact, they preface these stories by writing, we hear stories of families getting back on their feet because, despite job loss or illness, they could count on food from the food bank. So this is really wonderful. We have on the left here Remedio's story about using the food bank. We have Shelley's story And we see the quote, there's so much love, about people getting involved, how it's changed their lives. We also get on the corner there, healthy food, healthy mind, the community stories. And if you scroll down, you do get to see more data and graphics about how many people have joined the food bank, used resources, volunteered. But really, the hard cruncher, the real heart of the story here, impact, is in the stories, and that's why they are showcased to you first. Now, the second type of story is the success story. And you might ask, how is this different from impact? Is it just positive impact? Well, it's a very specific impact story in that it has a structure and always has a happy ending. Basically, it's the proof of what you can achieve. And for that, I really like Kiva. They do really great work in showcasing the success stories of individuals who borrow money. So Kiva is a nonprofit organization that allows people to lend money to others around the world by the internet. You get to share and lend money to low-income entrepreneurs and students in over 80 countries. So they regularly showcase individuals, in this case, Magdalene. So I'll tell you why this is a great one. First of all, you see the opening line, can you believe it? It's got some good comedy, which I certainly appreciate. Second of all, it gives concrete numbers. With the support of only 3 lenders, that's a really good number that's achievable, scalable. We see that Magdalene, a bee farmer, was able to purchase bee kits. And we see Magdalene herself front and center. She's not a passive person in the photo. She's actually actively working and showing you what she also wants to do with it. In this case, grow her business, pay for her children's education. And even better or best practice would have been to add a quote directly from Magdalene. And that is available in some of the other posts they use, and something to really think about when we really want to center the people whose stories we tell. Then there's the why we do what we do story. So this is getting on your rocket and getting to the mission. So it's to showcase your mission, to show why your cause matters. And for that, we decided to showcase here, we're just going to scroll through, the Native Women's Association of Canada. Their mission is to advocate for and inspire women and families of many Indigenous nations. And what they want to show, and this is a quote they've used on their social media platforms, is, our women and girls are sacred, gone but never forgotten. So what they do is actually create this digital story, and there's quite a few, it's a whole series, and they want to educate on the fact that communities have pointed to the high number of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, and that they want to use storytelling as a way of teaching. I think this is really important because not only do we want to make sure we honor the people who we have the privilege of telling the story of, but we also want to see how storytelling plays into traditions. In this case, oral traditions and narratives being used in the retelling and honoring of the individual by her own family. And when we move forward, this is Evangeline's story. We get to see her mother, Bella, speaking about Evangeline, sharing really beautiful photos, telling you that this is how she would like Evangeline to remember, and then doing a call to action. The final story is the show your work story. This is the one where you bring people into the kitchen, show them how it's made. And the idea is to make the viewer feel special, more connected to your organization. So you showcase your organization's personality and the visuals behind the scene. It could be a simple sort of mission moment, one that creates a positive association, but the idea is be authentic and show what it's really like. Habitat for Humanity is one I especially like because what they do is, I'll say first off, employ volunteer support to build homes for people from around the world. And the impact section on the website illustrates their work in various stories from every region. And we'll be showing you the one on the left here, which is the 2018 Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Work Project. It's really great because it's about 10 to 12 stills, but they work exactly like a story. There's the opening about the volunteers and the individuals whose homes are being built for. In this case, Habitat homeowners like John are there on hand to greet everyone arriving to the building site. We get to see progress along the way, in this case, the aerial view, with people saying when they walk through the construction site, we see the community being built already. And we see the individuals being impacted actually talking to former President Jimmy Carter himself, for example, saying, I want to build a foundation for my children, in this case, Kenise said. Habitat, home means security, a place to call our own. So these are really powerful, direct quotes from individuals. And then at the end, we get to see the finished project, and you feel like, you know what? I went behind the scenes, I saw how they built this. You could feel like you were a part of it. And so we've shown you what nonprofit stories can look like, what they can do, whether it's showcasing their impact, doing work behind the scenes, but it's worth also mentioning what can stories not do. So first of all, they cannot fix weak programs or services or help you in crisis management. If anything, they'll actually just bring more attention. And they can't replace other forms of marketing or comms, including the classics, right? So that tried and true methods of direct asks, one-on-one interactions. Third, they cannot take away or limit the time you want to spend on actually producing good work, or time spent on making sure we have ethics and representation. So in this case, that we don't generalize, we don't reinforce stereotypes, because after all, a story can't actually teach you about a whole population. It's just a unique story of an individual with a name and an experience. And that was the fun part. We get to show you the case studies out there on social media platforms. The main four we'll be using today and talking about are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat for the young ones, or the under 30s. So we'll start off with Facebook because there's a really big focus on it, because the majority of nonprofits are doing work here. There's so many changes. As you know, Facebook last year has taken away the organic aspect of it. I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible when I talk, but you now basically will only use your Facebook page as a landing page. You need to really disseminate information out there and really get your stories shared, use Facebook ads. And Facebook did this on purpose to drive people into paying for ads, right? So what we want to do is tell you what are the best practices out there and what organizations are using Facebook pretty well. So first of all, we'll say Facebook is a great place to share stories. Software Advice actually surveyed a random sample of 2,833 US donors, and we think these are comparable in Canada as well, to find out what kind of communications they want to receive from the nonprofits to which they give. So the findings here you see a whopping 60% for the impact and success stories. So if you've got other great things like nonprofit news, upcoming events, keep sharing them. Those are great, but make sure the bulk, what you really invest in here, is the impact and success stories on Facebook. And Facebook can be used for two things, and Mark Zuckerberg himself actually said that's what he hoped Facebook was being used for. So the first is to inspire conversation, and this is a really great example by Sick Kids Foundation. What they do is, here they showcase the story of Marcus, who, as we see on the side there, was playing hockey and had a knee injury, and yet the knee wouldn't heal, and that's when he discovered he had cancer. And so you have the story, at the end you have the call to action. You see the website there, www.fundthefight.ca. And what you have next up is an amazing conversation. So Anek there at the bottom, for example, talks about their brother's procedure being done years ago, and what a brilliant procedure it was, how thankful they are for sick kids. Jennifer up there talks about her own experience as well. We get an individual saying that they have a similar story to Marcus, Justin, for example, saying they had the hockey tryouts, had knee pain, couldn't get better, and that's when they found that they had cancer. So it's these emotional stories, getting other people involved, that really drive impact. Another way to use Facebook is to create basically that enhanced trust. So you want to share outside articles that build in making you the key expert on the issue. And this is especially important, as we'll see here in the example, because after all, our job in the nonprofit sector should be in filling in the knowledge gap. And that's exactly what, for example, Nobel Women's Initiative does. So they're a collective of Nobel Peace laureates, women, who work on social justice, peace for women, the environment. And what they do is they often share resources actually from around the world, from issue areas they have in Central America and East Africa, as well as North America, Turtle Island as it is called by indigenous people. The idea is to show you that violence against women is everywhere. These are systemic issues we need to work on everywhere. So how do they do best practices? They share these external resources and articles and stories, and they'll usually start by giving you a context, as you see at the top, and then give you a direct quote from the individual. So with the article on the left about Black women journalists fighting back, we get a quote from Ethel Payne herself, saying, "I stick to my firm, unshakable belief that Black press is an advocacy press." On the other side, we get women activists are arrested at protests, in this case Stephanie Woodward, disability rights activist, saying, "There's a saying that freedom isn't free," and for us we truly understand that. So it's some pretty heavy stuff that really is important, as well as some pretty light stuff that's fun. For example, in this case, showcasing the beauty and simplicity of native food by Andy Murphy. And this got 76 likes. It's actually pretty good. As well as suggested books. And this one has a pretty funny title. It says, "Throw 2018 in the trash, but save these 10 books." So the idea is what they're doing is building the trust of being a knowledge producer, sharing other nonprofit stories, struggles of other women as well. And what they've done is built up that brand and now have an even wider and more responsive audience for when they share their own organization stories by their own women Nobel laureates. So let's get to the case study specifically with Shelterbox USA. And what they are is a disaster relief organization. And they use really simple graphics. We see aid with individuals working again, being active members with aid, delivery, showing you the actual boxes, impact, showing you the lives of people. And what they did is upload this video. And we thought it's great to show basic best practices. So this video here drove $3,200 in donations with just a $100 Facebook ad spend. And we thought it's a great example to share because you get to see it's actually a low production product that gives you great value. And we say low production because all it took, actually the whole thing was just filmed with a cell phone. But timing is everything. Shelterbox created this video within just a few days immediately after the landslide hit Peru and Colombia. So it's a short video. You see it's only 30 seconds. Again, best practices. Keep your videos short, between 30 seconds to 120 seconds. And it kind of goes like this. They didn't need an elaborate story. What they did is simply set the stage. Here's the aid worker on the ground telling us what's going on, that there is a disaster, and showing the families what's happened to the families, how they are affected, and then reminding at the end Facebook fans and supporters that they can help by donating. And another reason this works so well is because you'll see, so on the left is text only, and on the right is the video. So this matters because you can view it either on mute or with sound on, and you can view it in your mobile. It's in a square format. And now the majority of people using Facebook are actually scrolling through on their phones. So what we want to make sure is that when social media is consumed on cell phones or mobile, that the videos that are uploaded are delivered in a format that is unique. And in case you're thinking, how can I do that? They actually, Shelterbox, use Animoto, a tool we'll show you later. That's pretty easy. You can probably create this, honestly, in an hour if you're totally on your game. It's that easy. And finally, the video was uploaded directly and not linked to somewhere else. And then a direct upload gets you 10 times the reach, and that's super important. Especially because, Facebook and Google are competitors, and YouTube's owned by Google. So just linking to YouTube isn't enough. They're not as integrated as you think. So again, I can't say this enough, do direct uploads. Now we'll be looking at Twitter. So Twitter is that place where basically it's about connecting you to movements, connecting you to news, real time, quick tidbits. And what you're going to get with that is images. Images are really, really important on Twitter, and will actually get double to 3 times the retweets, for example, when they're linked or have images. And in this case, we decided to show you visualizing Palestine. What they say in their own words, it's a pretty simple mission, actually. They create visual stories for social justice. And Visual in Palestine show us that while statistics are great graphics can bring them to life. So in this case, for example, we see this visual here. And we see the bars here. So this is a prison cell with yellow birds, but every bird represents a Palestinian child in an Israeli prison. So that's a really powerful graphic of a trapped bird with the actual numbers. So, and this visual breaks down the numbers and data in a way that not only makes sense, but also makes an impact. And we know people can say it's hard to understand what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank and Palestine. And so their mission is to create these visuals and infographics that make understanding the history and injustices faced by Palestinians living under occupation and apartheid easy to understand and memorable. So this is one example of an image when you're scrolling down that actually is a news item as well, telling you today we celebrate the freedom and the release of Ahed Tamimi. So Ahed Tamimi is a teen Palestinian activist in the occupied West Bank, and she's known for an appearance in images in which she confronts Israeli soldiers and was then put in prison. And so her story is supposed to highlight the plight of Palestinian children in Israeli military jails. And in this case, what they did, when you click on the photo and you get to see, oops, sorry about that. Let's go back here. There we go. You get to see it in its entirety. It's really great because one, it's a great standalone visual. You want to look at it and figure out what's this about. Two, it has the actual data in there. So 8,000 Palestinian children being arrested and detained, being put in persecuted military courts since 2000. And then it has a direct quote from Ahed herself, a call to action saying, encourage those who are oppressed to continue their resistance. So it's pretty powerful stuff. Another way they've really done this well is actually visualizing their own impact. So here's an infographic showing you how people across the world in 424 cities and 65 countries have used visualizing Palestine. We see May from Tokyo, Japan, there on the right, saying that it's hard to understand such a difficult issue, but having visuals makes it easy to comprehend the injustice. Students from Johannesburg in South Africa, like Aisha, saying they're a small group who were in need of good visuals for Israeli apartheid-beaten campus. So this is really great stuff that they're doing. And really driving home the idea that a well-told story can change the way we understand the world. And that's why visual storytelling is such a powerful tool for the nonprofit sector. In this case, it's to change our understanding from seeing Palestine, Israel as a conflict, to seeing it as settler colonialism and apartheid. So it's no small feat, but the graphics definitely really help. And now, next up is Instagram. Instagram is your single platform for both image sharing and short form videos and telling stories. And we'll start with MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, because what they've done is something so cool and really innovative, is they've uploaded those actual videos and images of campaigns using comic book storytelling. So in this case, we hear a story about an individual being forced from their home in Honduras. And I'll just show you the still saying, we had a good life with our family there. But then the gangs came and the violence started, and we know they won't stop, threatened to kill us. And that, you know, even if we gave them the money, they'd force our children to join the gangs. And this is all said in the individual's voice. We didn't want to leave our home, but it was too dangerous to stay. And so you get that last tidbit at the end, and that really got to me, where he says, tell me, what would you do if you were me? And that is a really great way to interact with the viewer. And they've repurposed them into actual images they've used in other parts too, with different information. So for example, this that we saw in the video became a standalone image, giving a context about Central Americans having to escape because of levels of violence comparable to what the MSF teams see in conflict zones. Another thing they've done with comic books is actually created stories of their maternity ward, which is one of the biggest in the world in Afghanistan. So he sent an illustrator to actually watch with the patients, the workers there in person, and then create a full graphic. Some of them into videos, but you can see the full graphic on the website, and it's really cool stuff. And in this case, I actually first found out about it on LinkedIn, actually. And we didn't talk about LinkedIn in this webinar per se, because there are a lot of platforms, but this is not necessarily where nonprofits are doing a lot of their digital storytelling right now. What we see a lot is on LinkedIn, because it's a business platform. So people want to show innovation. And so MSF showed the story, but you'll notice the content is a little different. They've repurposed the same images, but instead they tell you about how in an Afghan hospital there are safety issues. So they are restricted and cannot do filming. So instead, in an innovative way, they've turned to illustrations to share the special story of women caring for women. And those are the actual images, videos, but there are also the live stories. And for this one, we're showing you Care France. So they did a really cool campaign. It was called Stories from the Other Side of the World, that followed 7 women over 7 days. And we get to see them, each one daily, actually streaming and showing you her full day from start to finish. Some of it is really moving stuff. Some of it is, you know, the daily mundane things. But it feels real, it feels accessible. When I watched it, I thought, you know, this could be something I would do as well. So the one I'll show you today is Mahmoube, who is an Afghan refugee who arrived in Athens, Greece a year ago. We get to see her here. And in addition to fighting for her own right to asylum, she's also helping other new arrivals in Europe, arriving families and individuals alongside CARE's local partners. So we see her different videos. In this case, she's actually at the center, and this is good practice. She's tagging other people so that when you see this, you can say, hey, what's Theodora up to? Let me go check her her Instagram account as well. We get cute things like this little girl who's clearly just not having it and doesn't like the chickpeas. We get to see other newcomers she's showcasing like herself. In this case, Zila and her dad, who just arrived from Iraq with a really sweet welcome. And we see at the end of the day, she comes home, she's with her daughter, she writes back home, and they're doing something seemingly mundane, but again, powerful, because it's something we would all do. For example, in this case, storybook and coloring with her daughter. And then by the end of the day, we're also reminded of why we're hearing Mahmoud's story. In this case, she posts asylum office tomorrow with a fist bump, with the hashtag never give up. And this is how you get to see people's resilience. You see them in action. They're not just passive victims. And the line used in the different stories, because we said there were 7, at the end is always this. We all have a story to share. Some deserve to be supported. And then, before the video ends, we get the last selfie again of Mahmoud. And this is so important because what we're getting is we're recentering the individual we're telling the story about. In this case, Mahmouda herself. And seeing, having, her spent the whole day being reminded that this is a story that matters. And then at the end, best practice, putting the branding there, so care. And in this case, showing you exactly what they want to do in this action, their mission, to support the fight for women's rights around the world. So it's really great stuff. And if we know Facebook as well as using these live videos, Instagram is using these live videos, the original ones who started it all are none other than Snapchat. And Snapchat is really great, we think, so far, how it's used. It can be in a variety of ways to thank donors, but behind the scenes is the best so far. So Snapchat is great because it can help you post brief behind-the-scene videos of your organization at work. And you don't have to worry about it being professionally produced or anything like that. In fact, keep a budget because the more you showcase the authenticity is the more you showcase the personality of the people who work there, and and that's what makes the organization shine. So for that, we're using Charity Water. And they are a pretty new charity. So whereas CARE and MSF, for example, have been around for decades, they actually only started in 2006. But since 2016 alone, for example, they've fundraised over $200 million. And the reason is they are so good at using marketing and social media, these really innovative ways. For example, they're like incredible at Snapchat. So what we see here is actually a couple of, for example, snapshots. And really, like I said, it's pretty budget. All you need, for example, is a cell phone and in the image on the left, some emojis at 100%. With the one on the right, just a funny filter. And for example, in this one, and that is a full video, we've got a few things. First of all, some pretty funny images with the eyes there on the left. Again, using emojis, a basic fact to share. So 40 billion hours in Africa alone are spent walking for water. I mean, we wouldn't, and when we talk about ethics later on, for example, let's get more specific. Let's not just say Africa. But then at the end, we also have that call to action. Together, we can change the world. This guy's pretty goofy, but this is exactly what you want to do with Snapchat, right? You want that quick, accessible sharing of information that drives someone. And what they're really good at is letting people know on their other social media platforms about what their work on Snapchat to drive them in. So for example, here they write, join us on Snapchat today as we go behind the scenes with our designer team and get a little messy for clean water. In this other one, it says, go behind the scenes on Snapchat and help us pick a song for World Water Day. And the comments are people who didn't actually interact, engage with them on Snapchat, and still wanted on this medium to comment. So Brandon Zepp there at the bottom is having a conversation with someone saying, which song did you choose? Cause number 2 was getting me emotional in a short time. So these are really, really great practices. And now that we've shown you why digital storytelling matters, what best practices are, what case studies are out there, you're probably thinking, okay, I'm ready to go. I have great stories. How can I get started? What tools can I use? And we know it's really hard to get to this, because good visual content is hard work. And of course, nonprofits are working with limited budgets, time, and staff. It can be a struggle to find new and innovative ways to tell your organization's story and mission in an impactful way. So that's why we have decided to share with you tools that are pretty easy to use. And we should always say we're product agnostic here at TechSoup. So there's actually a ton of tools. These are just the ones that we've seen other nonprofits use that are tried and tested. But you can figure out what really works the best for you. And if these tools give you good ideas, also remember that you can also hire artists from your community to also help you produce work. And that's a really great way to share your work. So let's get started with the first tool here, which is the graphic design tools, Canva. Canva is a free tool for non-designers, and it's your one-stop graphic design shop that gives you practically anything you would need. So we see up here, you can create infographics, you can create Facebook posts, even ebooks. And I think the best part of it all is that it's made for non-graphic designers. So there's already a variety of options that you can choose from. And these are great because you have different color combinations already created that we know are the most effective. You can, even if you're lost and you think, I need an inspiration here, help out, you can actually check their design ideas to get some inspiration. And if you already have your own logos and images, perfect. Just upload them onto the site and incorporate them into whatever you create. And most importantly, everything's already sized for you. So for example, we see the Facebook post there. Usually images on Facebook that work best are, when you want to upload them, for example, 1200 by 630 pixels. With Twitter, it's 440 by 220. You don't have to worry about that. If you pick what medium they should be uploaded on, they'll size them for you. So you'll actually be pretty good to go. Another one is Extensio. It may be Extensio, but I think Extensio makes it sound super classy. And what they do is, it's the same idea. They have some templates that can be customized to meet the needs of nonprofits. And what you can do is easily create and share documents called folios. And so you see a few folios up here, for example, project summaries. Infographics you can use as well. It's really great stuff. You just drop and drag around different boxes and create those templates. Really useful ones are the user persona creator. A fact sheet is one you can create, a fundraising summary, and there's even a media kit. And we should quickly mention Canva for nonprofits. They have a special nonprofit feature that is free. Extensio has a basic level. You'd have to pay to upgrade to pro, but they have said they're in the works to create a nonprofit Extensio plan. So email them, let them know. Companies are doing good things because it makes them look good. So let's pressure them, email them and tell them when you're going to get on that nonprofit suite so that we can get some of that and, put our stories into good digital formats. And then there's Adobe Spark. And Adobe Spark is actually a suite of 3 visual creation tools. So there's Adobe Spark Post, Spark Page, and Spark Video. Spark Post is a little bit similar to Canva in that it provides visually appealing templates and imagery that you can work with and then automatically post up to any social media marketing platform. Spark Page is more about pairing content with visuals. So you'll see here, for example, you get quotes. These are really great, but you can also photo journals, different types of things. You can even do magazines. When I say it's about content and visuals, think of like an annual report at the end of the year. That's what it would be really good for. And then finally, there's Spark Video. And it's your typical DIY, do-it-yourself animated video creation tool. So you can string in images, icons, photos, and then make it into a professional quality video in practically no time. And now, since we were mentioning video, let's get to the 2 video creation tools that we think are particularly useful. So the first one's Animoto, and we mentioned this, right, in how Shelterbox had used it. And it's pretty simple. Animoto easily turns your photos, graphics, and video clips into an animated slideshow. So it works best to create short videos that you can then use on your social media platforms. So again, Facebook and Instagram. And what is really good about it is that it can convert your slideshow into the square format that you need to be mobile friendly. And they have actually a few case studies on there of their own success stories of nonprofits. So if you want to see how other nonprofits are also using Animoto, that's a really great place to go. And then there's Lumen 5, and this one's particularly cool, and I hadn't seen anything like this before. What it does is converts your content into video. So see that long form content there? The idea is you would import your blog or long form content, and they'll turn it into a video. So you upload your blog post, you then edit text on the slides, like the ones you see here. And that's actually particularly useful because as you edit, you'll see what really stands out and you'll see the core messaging that you want to promote. So upload the blog post, edit the text, and then you choose some photos. There's a ton here, millions of free to choose from. And then you can even jazz it up with some music from their library and you're done. You will be looking pro and fresh in no time. So I particularly like that one. And now we've talked about storytelling, telling it works. This is how nonprofits are doing it. You can do it too. So let's make sure that whatever we produce, because it is a privilege to be able to tell stories of other people, how can we make sure they're ethical? This is not an add-on. It's actually the core of what makes a good story. So what makes a story an ethical story is what makes it a good story. The same questions that you would ask yourself, such as, do these stories correspond with our goals? Are we projecting our messages correctly? Will our audience perceive our messages? How will they perceive them? Those same questions about quality are actually the questions about ethics. And that's really good to ask because when we collect stories and we want to share them, asking these ethical quality questions can be uncomfortable, but is necessary. It gets us to really think about who we represent, how to make our work more effective, and how we can build trust. So I don't have all the answers for you, but I have a ton of questions. And this is content heavy. I actually wrote out all the questions, so you have them on these slides to look at, to really think about what makes a story ethical. So there are three things. The first thing I want to talk about is representation with dignity and respect. People are not stereotypes or shouldn't be when we represent them. Not stereotypes, not tokens, not representatives of a whole community. They are individuals with their own names and unique stories. And this matters a lot when we want to work with marginalized groups who face a lot of violence, racism, sexism, and stereotypes. How can we talk about their struggle without really reinforcing negative stereotypes about them that harm them? Because labels matter. So one thing we should have to ask ourselves is, are we sharing the wider and also specific context in which the story is set? Basically, let's give a social and political context to it to really show that this is a systemic issue. It's not an individual issue to a so-called culture. These are systemic, these are societal issues that can exist anywhere that we all have a responsibility to work on because we are all a part of as well. Sometimes with images, if they're set outside of Canada, would they look weird if you put that image in the Canadian context? If they do, that tells you there's something about that image that's not right, that you can interrogate and work on your staff with your staff on. Third question, are the individuals active participants? Are they shown in their full resilience? That's really important. Let's not just make them into passive victims or just stare into a camera, for example. We need to show them with the dignity and respect to really honor their story. And the second thing, informed consent. Consent is ongoing. It can be taken away at any point. So things you have to think about are written consent forms that are signed, making sure we respect and work around concealing identities for people when there's issues of safety. How do we use translations, for example? And how do we bring in translators that are safe? So questions you should ask yourself are, have I requested informed consent every time I've posted this story? Have you really shared expectations of how a story will be told and retold to the person whose story you're using? And if you have used someone's story, can they actually access that story and request any changes? Think about that. And if you work in a really big nonprofit and you think, oh, these stories are from the field, I didn't actually necessarily choose the images or so on myself, then ask yourself, how many stages did the story go through until it reached your desktop? Who is at every single stage? And contact them. Do your due diligence. Contact whoever collected the stories and ask them these very questions to make sure the stories are collected ethically with dignity and respect. And then there's the intention versus impact. We mean well, that's why we're in the nonprofit sector. But our impact is what's important. It's how our actions impact people. And that's what we need to really focus on here. Images have, and the way they've been used in the sector, have often objectified people, have been part of the commodification of poverty, taking someone's struggle to make money from it for fundraising. And there are also issues with remodification. Sometimes an image will be put out there and you have no control over it. It'll be remodified. So Alan Kurdi, for example, the Syrian toddler who passed away, drowned at sea and washed up on the shore. We saw images being taken of him that were then repurposed and reused in his own family, including an aunt here on the West Coast in Canada said, please do not use this image. Instead, let me give you an image of Alan Kurdi with his brother when he was happy. This is how you respectfully should remember him. So think about these questions and ask yourself, the individual you're getting the story from, do they rely on you for a service? In that case, would they feel an obligation to tell you a story to still receive the service? How many people have been involved in the gathering, creation, and sharing of the story? The more people are involved, the more you have to ask questions and contact these people. And now we talk about power. We have a lot of power in both the tech tools that we have, like the ones we've shown you today, as well as our position, delivering services and sharing stories on behalf of other people. So what type of words are you using? Are your words accessible? The content mediums, the tech, what kind of power are you using to choose to create and tell the story? That's the question. And sometimes I think to myself, how would the individuals under their structures of power tell their own story differently? So if we wanted to tell a story about, for example, Magdalene and her bead business, how would, if Magdalene could tell you the story herself in her own mediums, actually deliver it? That's a really good way to think about storytelling. And this all comes down to power. We hold the power in the retelling. We hold the power in the structures that allow us to work comfortably in our nonprofits and deliver these stories. And we hold the power in building these relationships. And that is so key. A story is not something you can just extract from a person that becomes a snapshot. Really good stories are built through strong relationships. Take your time to get to know the people whose stories you are telling. Take the time to provide the context for a story. Don't just throw out a simple quote. Really try to build it up with good, solid content. And because I didn't want to leave you hanging with no recommendations, my recommendation is, first, always come back to this question. How do people who you are interviewing or introducing, showcasing, want their story to be told, if at all? And think of these three things. These are three that we put together, but we actually want to collaborate. We want you to bring ideas and let us know, how do you make sure you deliver ethical storytelling? We have three basics. So first on the left is context and names. And this is a map you see here, asking how did they get there? So if it is about a family fleeing Central America, how did they get there? Provide the context about the violence, the gangs, and the inability to stay there because it would mean death, right? And give them names. So make sure, again, you provide that systemic issue and that you make it about a societal problem that could exist anywhere. The second thing, instituting policy. So consent forms, making sure that, for example, when a story is retold and reshared, that people are asked for consent and are informed about this. And this is really important because you may not stay in your role. Maybe you're new to a role and you've inherited work from someone else. If there is policy in place instituted, it's fixed, it's firm, and you know what the boundaries are and the standards. And finally, artists and copyrights. So definitely use these tech tools that we showed you, but also think about building community with artists. Get artists to do innovative things like creating comics for you, for example, but make sure you really work on copywriting the artist's work, and that if the work is stolen online, repurposed and reused, that the artist is told so that they can take action and decide what to do with it. And so, like I said, let's collaborate. We'd love to actually build even more resources on that. Potentially actually even create a webinar on ethics of storytelling, because I have a lot of the questions. I don't necessarily have all of the answers because I don't have all of the context either. So if you want to hear more about this, you have ideas for this, please get in touch. Let's collaborate and let's possibly create something. Because when we did the research for this webinar, we didn't see that much online. And finally, we will tell you that when we upload the slide deck and the recording on our blog page on the website, we will have a list of suggested resources. One of them will be actually a couple of places we did find some information on ethical storytelling, if you want to learn some more on that. So that is all for the actual presentation. And now we are ready to take questions. We have quite a few, which is really great. So we'll start with the first question. So that was off the website with the Red Cross. Oh, so the question, sorry, we're trying to get ahead as fast as we can, but we skipped over it. Question is, what platform is the Red Cross info on? Is it Facebook? So there's different ones. There's International Red Cross, there's a regional. We showed you a snapshot off a website, but they are on Facebook and on all the regular platforms that we showed you today. A second question, do you recommend storytelling on social media and more static information on the website? So that's actually a really great question. What you want to do with storytelling is engagement, but you still want to drive people back to your website. So always link back to the website, but if you want to keep the website static, this is where you have the foundation stories, how the organization was set up. That's where the storytelling is used for fundraising and has a static video. Anything else can be shared on the website as well, but cross-shared on the other platforms. And it can be a way to really create, like I said, an actual conversation. So don't just throw the story out there. You have to do that constant follow-up. On the website, it's not necessarily like that because you get to just post it and, well, leave. But it also means that you're doing different metrics. So measuring who visits your website is a little different than measuring how many likes, retweets, and so on the post got. Okay. So another question we have here is, can you tell us what is the name of the app used to create the 30-second video with text? Yes, so that was Animoto, as we said. So another question by Laura, do you have any tips for successful hashtagging? Yeah, so the actual best practices on hashtags by Buffer, Social collected this, was to say only use one and let it be the hashtag, either the name of your campaign or the name of the individual, for example, and do the call to action, not necessarily in the hashtag, but actually in the link you want people to click on to drive them to the donation page and so on. Kyla asks about Lumen 5. Wow, we're going pretty fast through these questions. She says, you mentioned a blog post. Would it work for newsletters as well? I think you can insert the content. The idea is that it's long form content. So a newsletter totally could work. You want to make sure, though, that you have 3 main points. When I think of how you want to relay a story, anything less than 3 will not make it a very, compelling story. It'll be too quick. Any more than 3, you'll lose the audience. So if it is a newsletter and you want to make a video, do that for sure. But think, what are the 3 main things I want to get into this? And another thing, and maybe this was part of your question, you're probably thinking you send out newsletters and email campaigns. Should you send out a video? We recommend for newsletter campaigns where you want to drive donations to keep them in simple text. It was actually Brady who did our webinar last month in October on year-end fundraising, who said that when you want to do email campaigns to drive donations, putting a video first can be distracting. Just keep simple text with a simple action. But if you want to, so do that. But if you do want to send a newsletter that has a bit of video in it, do that as well. But I would say move it more to the bottom. Keep whatever is simple and text at the bottom to to grab the attention. Keep that your focus for what you want, essentially. So what else? How do you accommodate to individuals who are visually impaired, deaf, or otherwise might have difficulty accessing visuals and video content? That is a great question. And I actually did look into that. And what you can do is put closed captions. And so when I showed you the first video, the one with Omar, the boy who stopped growing, they actually, whether it was a narrator talking or not, they did tend to put the actual captions in there. So I'd say always put the captions in the video. When it's visuals, and this is something new that we want to try out, some organizations that do want to make their work accessible will actually tell you, and we'll put it in brackets, what is in the visual, so that when it is read out loud for an individual who's listening and scrolling down, it'll say image below displays. So for example, it would say image below displays young boy sitting on desk staring into camera, just to set the scene for you. So do that, and then write the context of anything else with the quotes that you want. And if you're really interested in this, email me, because I can send you the exact examples that I've seen online that we are also thinking of using here at TechSoup. But that's a really, really great question, and something we constantly ask ourselves, because it's an ongoing learning process about accommodation and what we can do digitally online. Okay, so we have here a question. Oh, this is a different one. It says, can you talk about storytelling for industries where it is taboo to get help, like credit counseling? In this industry, it is hard to get people to tell their story because they are embarrassed. So I guess my question is it about telling the story of the individual who came to use credit counseling? You can make it, you can actually tell them it's an anonymous story. I don't have the best advice on this one because this is a very specific context I have never encountered. But I would say to maybe tell people, to first of all talk about anonymity, maybe even do surveys with people. But make sure it's people you've built a relationship with. So when I said we want to make sure we build relationships, it's so that when it is an embarrassing story or simply a story that is hard to tell, and rightly so, if you make sure first build relationships with clients, create that trust so that you can really understand why you're asking, tell them this is not about them, this is about a general struggle. So depersonalize it and say, we've seen so many people come in with the same issue. We want to write about the issue itself. Can you help us better understand this? What do you think we should tell people? So make it less about that individual having to maybe expose themselves and make themselves vulnerable, and ask them about this general issue. That's where I recommend you would go with that, actually. Right, what other questions do we have? It says, do you have suggestions for storytelling in cases where the stories also have to maintain confidentiality? Yeah, so that's why I mentioned the comic books and so on being used by MSF. So when I'd previously done some volunteering work, so this is the extent of my knowledge, with a women's shelter with confidentiality, one was actually about having written signed forms to be really clear about what is being shared, how it is being shared, where it stays. And I think two, the stories that we did here, taking away very specific details and making it more about what mattered in the story, what was the real impact, and what was the issue that could, practically affect us all. So if you go to see the comic book that was actually created by MSF on the maternity ward in Afghanistan, we hear the particular story of Selma, but details that are very specific about Selma's life were not given. Rather, it was about the process Selma went through when she came to the maternity ward, when she had her complications, how she felt, her personal feelings. When she was getting the medical service and so on from the nurses and the doctors at the maternity ward. So that would be another suggestion. And I think finally, we said informed consent is ongoing. If there is an issue of confidentiality as well and the individual is worried, make sure you create a process where they get to have, basically they're informed about every time a story is shared. All right, another one. It says, how do you manage to look active when there's a lot in a room meeting setting in a non-for-profit? So I'm not sure I fully understand this question. I'll tell you what my interpretation is. So I guess what you're saying is it's a visual it's a still visual, right? There's not much going on, and how can you manage to make it look active? Maybe create a context around it, explaining what's going on in the visual. But don't put the context separate from it. Put the context in a block quote within the visual. And maybe make the visual move. So make it a short 4 or 5 seconds where the visual moves around, and maybe that way it feels a little bit more active. I hope that answers the question. If it's, if I misunderstood it, please send me a follow-up question by email and let me know. All right. So this is a good one. It says, my nonprofit has no social media presence. Don't worry, we've been there, I've seen this. And the question is, how do I begin creating? What kind of post should I start with? And the context, I appreciate this, it's a literacy adult learning company. All right, so when we talk about moving on to social media platforms, best practices are to stick to 2 to 3 platforms. So quality over quantity. Pick 2 if you're gonna start and do it well. Start small and then scale up. So in this case, what I would say is encourage engagement. So start small. Facebook is a good one. But Facebook, again, does not have that organic share the way Instagram does, and they're integrated together. So you can actually share Facebook or create Facebook ads that work on both Facebook and Instagram. So I would maybe recommend that you start there. Encourage engagement. Remember, it's a conversation. So when you're creating these social media channels, think about the time you're going to spend not just in posting things, but the hour or 2 in waiting for those replies and driving the engagement. And get friends, family, and staff. And if this is adult literacy, there's definitely a lot you can build around that in the sense of community. Get them to share this with their networks. It seems simple, but it's actually pretty important for community building. And give resources that are easy to share. If this is adult literacy, build that branding, like I said. Build yourself as a trusted source and share some really good information. And most importantly, and this is definitely not done enough, we didn't mention it here, but it's thanking them. So if you really want to start with that, start figuring out what stories do you want to share, who do you want to showcase, and who do you want to thank to really make sure that volunteers and people who benefit from these services are showcased. I think that's all that we have for today because unfortunately we've gone over and it's now 1:02. But I really want to thank everybody for joining us today and taking their afternoon off to be with us. If you have more questions, email me and let me know. But we just want to remind you that we'll actually post the webinar recording and slides to our website within a week, and that we also will be sending out a brief post-webinar survey that will be launched after the session. So please feel free to put any additional questions there to fill that out. And thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. And it was really wonderful having you with us. Take care, everybody.